I'm very happy to be invited here as an expert this year for the first time, and I'm very curious, and I've already talked to some of you about your projects, and I'm meeting still a few more of you in the next couple of days. I don't know everybody yet, you don't know me yet, you'll get to know me a little bit this hour. And I was asked to give a masterclass on co-production and project markets. I haven't done this lecture before, so I've only just prepared something, and it was a bit hard for me to know like how much should I go into detail in which section, and also since I'm not a producer, I'm not really going so much into the specifics of like what does a contract involve, and what are the specific rules that apply to your kind of project. That is something that needs to be considered then individually, and there's a lot of details, there's also some good books about it, and there's a lot of courses for producers to be taken when they want to go more into co-production. I just try to give a very basic outline to understand like what is a co-production. I'll also talk a bit more about co-production markets, because this is my specific field of work that I come from, and that I can give some tips for, because you have projects that you work on, and after this probably some of you will want to apply to co-production markets or other training initiatives too. And well, there's some other experts here that can also tell about these, but I'll just give a short outline and like what to do, when to go to which market with which project in general. So I try to keep it basic. I have no clue about the timing. Tell me if I get too long. I will probably see when you fall asleep, but and we'll be on time, way on time for the soccer tonight. That's for sure. So yeah, let me just start. Maybe to introduce myself. I'm consulting mainly for international co-production events. My main concern is the Berlinale co-production market that I've started to work with from the beginning in 2003 is when we started. 2004 was the first market that we did, and I've been working there ever since the beginning. I'm working there with the projects that we select for the market. That's usually some 25 projects a year in the main selection that I work with, and I'm part of the selection team. But I also, because we're a small team, I also then work with the projects in detail. So I'm doing the preparation and the run-up to the market, devising a little bit of a strategy, like what kind of partners can they look for when they're at our market. This is an international market, it's a worldwide market, and that differs from other markets that I'll talk about later as well. We have a lot of dogs visiting today, hello. So working with the producers in preparation for the meetings, also planning the meetings. We have a software, and we have a meeting coordinator coordinating the meetings, but we need to often decide like which meetings have a priority or not, and that's also then up to me to work on that a little bit. So I need to know these projects that we work on there as good as I can, so I know like who could they potentially work with, and I also need to know all the other participants that are coming a little bit, or their profiles a little bit, so I can kind of take a guess that these people might be able to work together or not so much, or it's not so likely. So that's important. And then I also do our publicity and all our printed material and our press work. So we're really a small team working on putting together that event there. I got there through working through films festivals, which I started in the 90s when I was still studying. So I did my internships, and I did diverse internships in several. Hello. Are you a co-production? Or are you Greek? Maybe those two can start one, but they're both male, right? I started working for film festivals in the 1990s, and I also did an internship in a production. And then I realized, well, if I work in a festival, it's really nice because I can get to see a lot of different films. And I'm not stuck with one project for half a year or longer when you work in a production team. And when you're a producer, you work with a film project even longer. And you're really, I mean, you're working on several projects. But if you're a writer, you're really working on your one project for a long time, which I admire. But for me, I also like the mix and working on different things and getting to know different projects all the time. So for me, then the preference very quickly went to working with film festivals, where I just first working on the programming side, trying to see a lot of films. And now working with projects, I get to read a lot of film projects every year. And the disadvantage is that I can't go very much into detail with each project, and I'm usually not so much part of developing a project and trying to push it on the way, which is why I'm particularly happy to be here and be able to give feedback at an early stage, and I'll be very curious to see what you make out of these projects later on too. I worked with the festivals, and I somehow got to work with the Berlinale, and then for some reason I ended up on the industry side of the festival, whereas first I was more into films, and then I got kind of invited to work with the industry part, and worked for the first Berlinale. Back then it was called Talent Campus. And then now it's Berlinale Talents, and then I moved over to the Berlinale co-production market when we started that. So ever since back then, I didn't have a clue about what is a co-production, what does it mean, what's involved, what do producers even look for, what kind of projects are interesting, what makes a good project. So I've tried to learn this. You can only pick it up. From reading a lot of projects. Nowadays I'm reading probably about 500 projects a year, not all scripts, but treatments usually, but for the different kinds of markets that I work for and different initiatives that I go to meet projects. So I read a lot. I get to see 2 little films, so I'm trying to get back to practicing seeing films as well, because that's important. And yeah, where was I? Besides the Berlinale co-production market, trying to educate myself, I did a training in Niave, the producers workshop. So I did this in 2009. Some of you, Tinatin is not here, right? Asle and Emine, they did it as well. I don't know if anybody else is here. So for the producers among you, this is also interesting to learn about other training initiatives for producers to learn more about international co-production and project development and so on from the producing side. So I did that, and I did a course in story editing, but I'm not a massive expert in that, but I'm trying and practicing. I also work for Connecting Corpus, which is a co-production market that deals with East and West European co-productions. So usually it's projects from Eastern European countries or Southeastern European countries that are looking for mainly German partners, because it's a relatively small market. So the majority of the participants are Germans, and then the people from East European and Southeast European countries. Okay, so the first yawn is there, so I've got to speed up. Oh, he's covering up. And then sometimes I work for other events, like I do the pitching preparation at some events where there's pitchings, like I do that for Odessa Film Festival, which is coming up soon, and they make a presentation of their local projects, and I'll be preparing those guys. I did that in Kosovo as well, and I did do some tutoring and mentoring and training initiatives, like in Cluj last year. I did it in the Talent Lab and so on. But on a small scale. Mostly I'm busy in Berlin with the many projects that we read there and will start to collect again this autumn. So now from myself, which was very long, to co-production. How many of you are writers? How many of you are directors? And how many of you are producers? Yeah, okay, so you are in the minority a little bit here. And because co-production mainly concerns, like in detail, it mainly concerns the producers, but I think it's important also for directors and for writers maybe to have a a small idea of what it's about, and I don't know where all you are in terms of that knowledge and understanding. I will try to keep this like basic, but if it gets too complicated or if it's too basic, let me know. If it's too basic, I'm not sure I can put any more on top, but if it's too much, I can always move on to the next. So, I mean, there's big talk always about co-production, and often your producer will say from the beginning, let's make this a co-production because we need a lot of money to make the film, and we can't get it from our own country. There's already one reason to make a co-production, but what does it actually mean, and what's important when you are thinking to do a co-production? So a co-production basically is any type of production, I'm reading a definition, which involves more than one party in the production process through partnership, joint venture, or any other means of cooperation. So yeah, sounds very simple, it's just cooperating. In an international co-production, the advantage is that the film is considered a national film in each of the participating countries. And therefore, and through this, it can benefit from any kind of advantages that you can get from that country. So you can benefit from the public support, from subsidies, tax incentives, also some cultural advantages, because sometimes, for example, you have quota on national television, and if the film counts as a national film in that country, then it can also be part of that quota. So, or other cultural advantages like advertising. Sometimes when you go to a film festival, like you go to Cannes, for example, and you see a film that is advertised in several of the national pavilions because it's a co-production. Of course, it benefits from this. That like everybody's putting the poster for this 4-country film in their pavilion, and you see it all the time, and then you're like, oh, maybe I've got to see that film. Everybody's advertising it, it must be something. So that on a very simple level, but of course every national film institute will then also do something to promote the film as theirs. So that is the advantages. And what does it mean? It means that together with your co-producers, you have a joint ownership of the film, and you also have joint responsibilities, and of course you also share the recoupment in some way, but that's where it already starts. You've got to find some rules and regulations of how to set that up. We'll come to that a little bit later. So why would you make a co-production? One thing I already mentioned before, which ideally shouldn't be the main reason, is financing, or not the only reason, let's put it that way. If you are from a smaller country, if you are from Slovakia and you want to make a film that costs 5 million, can you get 5 million from Slovakia? So what do you do? So you try to get money in addition on top, and you look for ways to get the money from elsewhere. So why would a German partner, for example, come on board of your film? What do they expect? What do they need from you? That is something we're going to talk about too. But this is something, the mere financial reason. So you need to find money from elsewhere. The best reason to make a co-production, of course, is artistic reasons. So if you are from Slovakia and you have a German main cast, and you need to find this German main cast. You don't even know, like you just need, there's a character in my story that it needs to be German. I don't know which actor even to approach, and of course you do your research, but you also think, okay, wait a minute, I can also access the German market with this film now. So ideally you will find a German partner that will help you identify the best cast and help you also then with the financing, because they can also use the film on their own market then. Or you want to shoot in another country, locations is important. Sometimes it's also about know-how. If you are looking for example, you have animated parts and you're looking for a certain kind of animation that you know exists in some country, like in, I don't know, France? Yeah. Yeah, maybe France. Maybe also stop motion, that they still do a lot in, for example, Estonia or somewhere, and you're really looking for this specific type, of course, then you want to find a partner there that helps you with their know-how. Then, or else, as occurs a lot when you talk, like, I'm dealing a lot with projects from Eastern Europe, but also from Central Asia and so on, and they often say, okay, we don't really have the know-how in terms of like this for the sound crew. We don't have the equipment, we don't have the know-how, so we really want somebody from another country to help us with that, because we need the expertise, simply. There's also the technical resources. Sometimes it's about equipment or the underwater pool that you need to shoot in and that you might not have in your own country or in your own region. Cast I mentioned before, or crew I also mentioned before. If you're looking for a DOP from Romania, for example, maybe it makes sense for you to consider a co-production with Romania. Then also the second thing that I also already mentioned is the marketing, the market and the marketing. If you can, I don't know, if you have elements from another country, if you have known cast from France, for example, that will help you, because then it's more likely for you to get it sold to France, to get it distributed in France, and to get people to see it there, which is what you want in the end. Now, there's also disadvantages. Today I hear a lot of people, particularly like with first-time feature projects, and simply for the financial reasons, saying we need to make it a co-production because we cannot finance it from our own side. But there are also, and we need just 80,000 euros or something like that. But that doesn't work. I'll come to that a little bit later. That doesn't necessarily work. It can work sometimes, but you also have to consider the disadvantages of a co-production, and that's what you should consider beforehand, ideally. Is that first of all, it's a lot of paperwork. It's also a lot of translations. It's a lot of paperwork, often in another language. Then, of course, you have a much longer timeline for things because of all the translations, because of all the communication that you need to do with your partners in another country, and with all the funds and with all the different financiers involved and so on. And of course, also because if you have a partner from Germany, for example, you need to allow time for your German partner to apply to their national fund and to get the financing from their side. So it takes some time. It can take much longer than making it a local production. It also, translations, it also means a lot of travel, so that's expensive. It also means a lot of contracts, that's expensive. It also means a loss of control, because your co-producer doesn't only want to give you money, but of course he's also an owner of the film, and he also does his artistic contribution. And he also wants to have a say in the film, because he wants to be able to have the film work on his home market. So if you are using only jokes that won't work in his country, in your comedy, then he might say, can we maybe work on the script a little bit more? And you might not want that. And that's something that requires sometimes compromise. I mean, ideally you'll be on the same wavelength, and ideally you want to make the same film from the beginning, but if not, you will have to work on the same film at some point, and on making it the same film for everyone, and everybody agree to that film that you're making together. Well, also sometimes what you should consider when wanting to make it a co-production, from the very beginning is ask yourself, does my project have international appeal, or is it in fact a local film that I should try to make for the budget that I have available here in my country? That is a question that in my experience is too little asked these days, because people just say, I want to make a co-production, and sometimes they don't really consider what makes it interesting for a partner from another country. What is in it for this partner? So that is something that is required to co-produce. You need the right project for the right market at the right time. It needs to fit with the international appeal. Basically, if you have a package that interests somebody in another market, then that makes sense. But it's harder for a first-time feature project. Sometimes people come and the director hasn't made a short film and they want to be part of a co-production market, or they want to find a co-producer. But based on what? Based on what should a producer from another country say, I trust you to make a good film? If you have no film in your track record, then that's very hard to find a co-producer. Then that's like the last resort that you're trying, because you don't even get the money in your own country, which is not where you should go. Try first your own resources and make it from there, and then go international once you have something that you can show, that you can impress people with, and that they will want to believe in and give you money for and trust for to work with you. Because that also helps you to know if you are working on the same film together with your partners, when they see what your director has done and they approve that and they like that and they want to work with this person, that'll bring trust and support for this project. And what I mentioned before, that the director or the cast can also be an important thing for a partner to come on board. Like maybe you have a first-time director, but you have a superstar from, well, now Bud Spencer has just died, unfortunately. But if you came with a first feature from Italy and you want to work with a German partner, and you don't have a lot of track record, you don't have a lot of other things, but if you had Bud Spencer on board, bless him, then you might still find a partner there that want to believe in you and would want to make the film, because in Germany people would want to definitely see this film. So what you also need in order to make a co-production is enough elements that lend themselves to co-production. I mentioned those before a little bit. This could be elements of the film, like artistic elements like the cast, or it could be the locations, or it could be crew, and so on. And you need these elements in order to structure a co-production, unless it's a mere financial co-production, which is not the rule in Europe, which is not so often, so I won't talk about that too much. So when should you start thinking about a co-production? Well, ideally, probably early on, when you structure the project, when you see the story, and you see, okay, there are these elements that I have from another country, then definitely it makes sense to structure, to try and see if you want to structure, if you need to structure it as a co-production. If you don't have to, more experienced producers very often would advise you then don't make a co-production if you don't have to, because you will own the rights by yourself, you can make your decisions quicker, you can rely only on the fight between the producer and the director for what you want to do, and don't have to involve yet other parties that also want to have a say in that. Plus you have your own financiers from your own country, and you don't have some kind of dodgy equity investor from Switzerland in there that may want to take the money and run in the beginning. So you should start to think about it early on, but as I said before, and this is just a bit of a warning maybe, that people nowadays, or young producers starting out, they want to make a co-production right away from the beginning. There's often the danger of adding elements to the story of the film that don't belong there, and that will be found out, I think. So try not to do that. If you really, I mean, maybe this goes against something that other people say, and maybe it's not always true, but try not to add anything that's artificial to your story. Maybe also it sounds very basic, but try not to add anything that is artificial and that people will find out that it's artificial very easily when they read the project. I've had a lot of people pitch projects to me saying, oh, we have this project and it's ideal for co-production. Well, originally there was a story of 5 couples living in our home city. But now we were thinking, isn't it super smart that we put all of them in 5 different cities all over Europe? Because then we can find co-production partners everywhere. And I've already written the story. And then you're like, yeah, but you've written the story about Berlin, can I read it? And you're like, this is not Berlin. So, I mean, you should be knowing, of course, all you writers, you know this, but yeah, keep thinking of this and stay true to your own story and try not to add anything that you maybe don't know enough about or that doesn't really fit, because this story is actually a story that is set in another country, in another place, and not in that place that it's now added to. So that's an important, hopefully important advice. Already used a lot of time, so maybe I'm trying not to go too much into details about like what the structure is. Basically, if you want to make a co-production, first of all, you need to find the reliable partners, which I will talk a little bit about in a minute. And then what you need to achieve is that the national authorities recognize the film as a national film in each country. There are different ways in different countries how this is done, but it kind of needs a certificate of origin, and if it's recognized as a national film, then you can have all these benefits that I mentioned earlier, like you can apply for the funding and so on. And you can be part of those quota and so on that I mentioned. What may be important to consider is that there are certain treaties between countries that regulate like how a co-production, what needs to be part of the film and how a co-production can be structured. And one part of that is percentages. And there are certain rules that you need to consider when you say, for example, oh, we have a project and which has a budget of 1 million and we already have 950,000 euros in place. We only need 50,000 then, or 500,000, 950,000, you need only 50,000 euros, which is a share of 5% of the film, then no, it's not a co-production. It's you can find maybe a pre-sale in some other country, but most people wouldn't advise you to look for a co-production simply because of what I mentioned before, because of the higher cost. I mean, then you need 50,000, but if you make this a co-production, then you will need at least probably 150,000, because also the costs are rising of the film. And is it worthwhile, or can you get the 50,000 otherwise, or can you maybe reduce the budget so you can make the film on your own faster for less money? These are important things to consider. Normally in international rules and in international co-productions, there is, if it's a bilateral co-production, just as a rule of thumb, if it's a real co-production, not a financial co-production, you would have a share of at least 20% for if it's a 2-partner co-production. So you need to bring in quite a bit from the other country, not just some 10,000 euros or so. If it's a 3-party co-production, it's usually at least 10% for each partner, so that can be a bit smaller then. But otherwise, the 10% is more tricky to get the national certificate for the co-production. Well, basically, it just means, very simply, if you if you meet a Greek producer here and they bring you to your film, they bring you one extra from Isiros that is going to play in your film, and that extra costs you 100 euro, it's not a co-production yet. You will have to find some more elements and some more. Your producer will need to bring in a little bit more in order to make it a real co-production. So that's when it starts, where you need to puzzle it all together, and you need to figure out like what are the elements and what is the financing and so on. Basically, the share means a share for the financing that you bring in. So it can also be 50-50, but it just can't be 90-10 or 95-5% in a share. But basically, once you know like how do we want to structure the film artistically, then you can figure out like how can we structure it financially. Those two bits need to come together, and you need to figure out which elements precisely will come from where. So if you already have all your crew together, then it's going to be very difficult, but then maybe you will ask yourself, do I insist on this DOP that I have worked with before from my own country and that I want to work with for the next film? Or can I maybe consider a DOP to come from elsewhere? Because a DOP will give you a lot of credits, a lot of points when you want to make it a co-production. It will cost you something as well, which is part of that financial share that you bring in. Or maybe you are even looking for a DOP from another country. Or do you need a co-writer because your story is now set in another city in Europe? Or the composer could be something, the sound design, the costume people, the editors, or the post-production process that you can maybe do somewhere else. In the end, when it comes to spending money in different regions, but that is then part of another thing that I won't discuss here, is about regional effects that you need to fulfill when you have regional funding. It can go down to details like where is the travel agency based that books the flights for all the actors and so on, and the hotels. So those elements are in the end and also important, not for the main structure, but then later on for spending the money. So it gets very complicated, and you shouldn't envy your producer for that work. Not to forget that you need to see what elements, what does the other country require? Do they just need to see that money is being spent there? Do they just need to see that a financial share is coming from their country? No, they also want to see a cultural identity of the film. So sometimes, and for some funds that you want to access, if it's like in Germany, for example, you want to access a tax incentive, then you need to pass a cultural test with the film, and that will there comes into play what I mentioned earlier. If you have a DOP, or you have cast, or you have locations, that gives you a lot of points. Or the writer, if it's a costume, it's not so many points. So you have to figure out like how can you get to the points that you will need if you want to co-produce, if you want to access that specific fund in that specific country. So now maybe to talk a little bit about finding the right partners for this, like how do you actually identify the co-producer that you want to work with? Because a co-producer doesn't only just give you money, but he wants to speak about the story as well with you. He wants to speak about the cast that is involved, and he wants to also have a say in a lot of other things. And then maybe also if you produce a part in his country, then he will be the one doing that there, and you need to trust him to do what you like, to make the film, the same film that you want to do as well as a producer. As a director, you also need to be able to trust that producer to guide you through in their own country the way you want to be guided through, and to work under the conditions that you want to work as well in your own country. So often it's said that co-production is like a marriage, and you will need to work together with your co-producer for usually a few years in good times and in bad times, and there will be a lot of emergency and, I mean, normally a lot of emergency and a lot of weird and a lot of difficult situations when some funding falls through, or suddenly you have some kind of accident or something happens and you really suddenly need a lot of more money to make up, or the material is wasted and you don't have the right insurance for that or something. So you will suddenly need more money than you were thinking that you need to, and you need to solve these situations together with them all through the process. And if it's only the problem at the end of like where to premiere the film, because then you have the French co-producer that would say, oh, we need to go to Cannes, anything else doesn't count. Or the other, or yourself that says, well, I've been asked to premiere the film at my national film festival, and it's actually really important for me because I rely on this support forever, and they really did a lot for me. So to discuss these things and to have a good basis with your partners that you're finding, that's very important. So that it's really a lot of trust that needs to be there, and a lot of communication and the ability to solve problems together. That's so important, and that's why it's important to find the right partners. I won't go into co-production agreements, what there needs to be in there. I think that's too specific for this. But in the end, as I mentioned, each co-producer does their part of the financing, first of all, of the film. Then it's clearly regulated in the contracts, and through your negotiations and through your communication. What does each co-producer do in the production, in the actual production, and when? And then once all these problems are solved that are along the way, that we don't know what they will be yet, then you'll also share what comes back from the film once you've sold it successfully, like you found a world sales and they've sold it successfully all over the world, and all the money comes back. Then your agreement also regulates like who gets what at what time from the recoupments. First of all, when you want to make a co-production, you're sure you need to find more financing than you can get from your own country. Then you figure out like, where do I co-produce? Is it an artistic reason? I'm looking for Germany because I have all these elements from there. I want to shoot in the Schwarzwald, and I want to have 2 main German cast and so on. Then of course it should be Germany, probably. But if you are more like ready to involve maybe an actor French-speaking, and I'm ready to do the post-production elsewhere, and I'm open for a composer, then you have various options, because then you could look at France, you could look at Canada, you could look at Belgium, you could look at Switzerland. So that gives you different options that you then should consider, like what is the best and what works for my film. You need to find out what funding is available in each of those countries, and does it work with the structure that you could have in mind. Is there a chance of getting support for this film? Would they give support to a first feature from my country? Or not at all? Or what do they say? So, or are they alternatively other countries that I could be looking for to partner on with? It's important to have as realistic expectations as possible. So it's always advisable to talk to as many people. If you already know producers from a certain country, do talk to them, even if you don't want to work with them specifically on this project, but find out like what are the regulations, because the written regulations are always still kind of different from the actual regulations that come into play when it comes to the actual funding decisions. Some things are just not mentioned in the regulations. I don't know, there's this thing in France, for example, Isabel, you might be able to help me there, with CNC, if you apply for with an international project, that they only consider the first 40 applications or something, And nobody says that, but it's there. So you need to kind of find your partner that can help you with that. No? It's not like that? Sorry?
Another possibility to jump.
Yeah, okay. But there are these unspoken rules or unsaid rules, or that, you know, produce...
First 40 in order of them applying?
Sorry?
Like first 40 projects as they applied, so after 40 applied, all the others applying later are out. Is that...
Well, I didn't want to throw in a discussion like that, but it's something that somebody once said, and apparently there's a way around that, so so I don't want to set this as a rule. But yeah, but there are these things, like, for example, if you apply to regional funds in Germany, the regulation of the regional fund might say you can get this and this amount of support for a minority co-production, and you need to spend 125% of what you get in this region. That's fair enough. So you need to spend more money than you get from them. So you need to get the 25% from somewhere else. But that might not be enough, because if there's a lot of competition of projects, so you have 200 projects applying and they can only support 20. So which ones will they support? Maybe they will only be able to support the ones that spend 200% in the region, because of course they want to maximize the effect in their region. They want to have the maximum spend possible in their region. So maybe if you have this super duper project, you still have a chance, but maybe otherwise you don't, because they will just say, okay, we have a star-driven project that is spending so much money with us, then we'll take that one for the support. So these are like the rules that only a partner will know in that is based in that country, because I mean, if you have a lot of experience, you know that also for other countries. But normally it's really, I mean, it's important to be able to rely on the information that your co-production partner that has about that country. And so that requires him also to have a little bit, ideally, of experience in that country. Of course, everybody starts out at some point with co-productions. But to know a little bit the scene and the ways of applying for funding, and it helps, I guess. So, but for yourself, you should also do some research. You shouldn't just simply rely on other people that you talk to, because of course you also want to know that they're telling you the truth. So you meet somebody who's really nice from a certain country, but if they don't have a clue on how to finance a film from their country, doesn't help you. They can tell you, if you don't know it yourself, then they can tell you the blue out of the sky, and you will believe it. But you should also, have a little bit of an idea and do your own research, like what applies there and what is available there before you nail down a contract with someone. What's really important for you to consider when you want to make a co-production is the timeline. Do you have enough time to involve a co-producer? This is something that I'm concerned with a lot, working at co-production markets, is that projects apply to our market. Our market takes place in February, and we get an application. The applications are in October. So we get an application from someone who says, we're shooting in March. And then I say, then you can't come to our co-production market. So I'm calling them, I'm saying, is this a mistake? Did you maybe mean March the year after? And then they go, no, I think we're good. We have already a lot of money, and I think, now it's October, by the time we will have more money, and so on. But then I have to explain them, but if you are looking for co-producers, say from Germany, for example, if you're looking for co-producers, they need some time after they meet you to be able to get some money from their home market. So, as a rule of thumb, after meeting them, calculate at least half a year, because they need to wait for the next deadline for their fund that they can apply to. They need time to speak to their distributors, to their TVs, and so on. And then they have the next deadline. If you're lucky, they have 4 deadlines a year. So maybe 3 months after or 2 months after you meet them and you really agree with them very, very fast. 2 months after, they can maybe apply. But then it takes another 2 months for the funding decision. So till you have the money, it's not much. Till you have the money, it's October. So that's something really important to consider. And of course, it slows you down also in the process because of all the contracts, because of all the agreements, all the negotiations, all the different financiers involved. So if you are looking to produce very fast, then try to rather do it with your own resources and not co-produce then. But otherwise, revise your timeline. I mean, really, and do it honestly and do it soon enough. Consider it when you think, I need a co-producer. Then try to be realistic about it. Try to really put it down like, okay, my co-producer will need this amount of time. I still need this amount of time because your co-producer can probably not become attached before you bring in any money from your own country. So first of all, you need to apply to your local fund, get some money from them. When is your next deadline? When is your funding decision? When will you know? And when can then the next step set in for your co-producer to become on board? So maybe you will need a year from now and not 5 months. Or maybe you will need 1.5 years from now because you won't know from your national fund before next spring or so. So when you check for partners, how do you do that? If you're looking, I'm always coming back to Germany because I work at a market which is international, so you can also come and look for partners from other countries, but of course I'm a bit more familiar with the German market. If you're looking for German co-producers, then for example at a bigger festival or also on the website for Focus Germany, you will find a list that lists German co-production partners. They're listed by region, and it's a list, it's this thick, a lot of pages, and even they introduced like 3 credits, but they only have the film's titles, and maybe some of them you know, but very few of them you know. Also, you don't know anything about the region. You have to do a lot of research when you look at this kind of list. You can get this list very easily, and it's a good starting point. But from there, you still have to, look at them in detail and look at their profiles, check their websites, or know their films. Find out what did they do, what is their track record, have they made films that are in the same kind of range of budget or in the same focus, in the same genre that you're working at. Are they likely to be interested in your kind of project? Is there a similarity in their taste, or maybe you're a fan of their films and you think you're doing something that could be along their lines? Are they on the same level of experience as you are? Are they more experienced? Are they less experienced? And what does that mean? Can you work with someone who's less experienced than you? Could be okay. Are you working with someone that's more experienced with you? Is it helpful, or are you afraid then that they will pull you over the table? Or are they more or less on the same level, which might be useful for you to make the same experience in the same time with the international co-production? Then find out who they worked with, and if you can find someone that you know that has already worked with them, you identify someone and you say, oh, I'm really interested in this company, in this country. It sounds very interesting. I don't know them yet, or I've seen them, or I met them briefly, but I don't know much more about them. How do I get to know them? How do I find out if to work with them? It's a lot of, also talking to people, trying to find out, has somebody worked with them and what were their experiences? Did they have a trustful relationship? Are they going to continue working together or not? Or do they say, oh no, hands off, don't work with them? It's always important to try to find out as much as you can before, and try to find out what are their projects that are lined up. If you have a partner that you think they would be ideal for my project, and even they might say, oh, we love the project, we really, really do, but we have already, we can apply to our fund only next year because we have 3 projects, minority co-productions lined up, and we need to wait for the next and the after next deadline. And then sometimes it doesn't work. It just doesn't work for the timeline, and that's sad, but if you have found somebody who would be your ideal partner, but then you need to consider what to do, and since you want to make your film, you will probably rely then on a recommendation from them for another partner, and producers also do that, give the projects on to another producer that they also trust and like, and think they will make a good film with you. So my next topic would be co-production markets. I don't know, I'm even running over time a little bit. Are you all still awake, kind of? So if you're looking for partners, for a co-production partner from another country, you can do this research, as I said, with this kind of list, or you talk to people and ask for recommendations, or you travel to film festivals and try to meet producers from there or from other countries that are there. And there are also specifically organized co-production markets where you come with a project or you come without a project, usually then as a producer looking for other projects. But as a writer, sometimes you can also sneak in or director, sneak in, have a look, who's there, can I maybe also talk to some people that are interesting for me. But it's better with a project, of course, because you want your project to be highlighted and you want to benefit from that and you want to be presented the partners on a silver plate rather than having to approach and grab everyone from the side. So co-production markets are usually part of film festivals that are trying to offer a service for producers and for financiers, so as to help them, first of all, by identifying a number of interesting projects, but also to offer them the service of organizing the meetings and not having this, like when we started the co-production market in Berlin, the situation was that all the producers were coming to Berlin and everybody had their projects in their pockets, but there was no space for them to meet. So everybody was arranging their own meetings, and they were meeting in the lobby there, and then they were meeting in the film market there, and then they were meeting in the restaurant over there, and it takes a lot of time. So a lot of time and a lot of organization. So we wanted to offer a place for the producers where they can meet, and specifically to identify a certain amount of projects that are interesting for potential partners and that they can get presented in a simple and way beforehand, and where they can identify, okay, this is interesting for me, this I want to be part of. And then to facilitate the meetings, because we do it all in one spot, and if you participate with a project, you have meetings every half hour. It's very stressful, but you don't have to leave your table, and you have water there, at least, usually. And you don't need to pay a coffee in the Hyatt lobby every half hour. That's putting the advantages a bit small, but ideally you will also find the matching partners for your project there, and get help in this process. So why would you attend a co-production market with a project? Well, first of all, to find international partners. If you don't know anybody, then of course it's useful for you to have this help of an organized event taking place and bringing you these partners that are interested in your project. But also sometimes people use it to find new partners that they haven't worked with. So, for example, in Berlin or also in Cottbus where I work, sometimes you're surprised because you get an application from a company and you know they are super experienced, and I'm sure they've worked with France a lot, or I even know they've worked with France a lot. Maybe this is a German company applying with a project, and I know that they've already co-produced with France 3 times. So now they're sending us the project, and you're like, so what does that mean? Are you covering up? You already have your French partner, but you're pretending you're looking for one, or what is that? And then sometimes they would say, no, but we're looking for a new partner because maybe we didn't get along the last time, or maybe we just we want to follow this time, we want to follow a different process, or we need access to something that our partners that we usually work with cannot give us. So to identify new partners and find new partners that you hadn't considered or known yet. Sometimes also just to throw the dice and say, okay, I want to meet new people and I want to see like what's in it from another partner, because I've always worked with these people, but maybe it's also time that we reconsider our relationship and try to look for something new. So much for the marriage. Sometimes it can also be a matter of awards that are there at the market or at the event that you are craving for. Ideally, it shouldn't be the sole reason, because the purpose of the co-production market is to find you a partner, not to give you an award. Another thing is that comes into play is also just to evaluate your project, which is also something that you're doing now here at this workshop when you speak in your group and you have an international group and you get some feedback from people from other countries to your project. That is so helpful and so important for the development of your project. But also when you're already in the financing stage and you go to a co-production market, you will get this feedback and people will say, but this I don't understand, and it'll still be another test for your project, for the validity of your project. Will people in another country understand your project? Will they want to see it? Are they interested in it? And which countries are surprisingly not and surprisingly so interested in your project? And the other thing is to generate an awareness for your project. So you are in the press release, you'll get a big coverage somehow from, it's usually not a big coverage because the co-production markets are more the industry side and they don't get so widely covered, but at least you're in the list of projects that are selected there. Yes?
For me, when I go to co-production markets, and I'm not a producer anymore, it's also a way to feel what is in the air. Because most of the time when you develop, in our bubble, and you feel that what you are doing is unique,
Yeah.
it is, because it's prototypes when you develop. But then you go out and you discover that something is in the air. It's not a big drama, but as soon as you know, you can adjust your project to what's going on all around, because most of the time when we select a project, we are surprised because there are 10 projects about the same topics and 20 about the same kind of character. And people are not aware of that. So when you go to that kind of event, suddenly it sounds obvious. And of course you get depressed. The depression is just the first step. After that you recover and you make it stronger.
Yeah, true. Everybody understood? Yes. Yeah, that's an important part as well to see, to get this feedback also, like what other people might have the same projects as you do in a way. So there are very, a lot of you will have heard of different kinds of co-production markets or similar events, networking events. Also there is some events that are a mix of like training events and but they also make you meet partners. This is, for example, the case in Niave, but also Torino Film Lab does that, or Jerusalem Film Lab does that. When you actually develop your project, you work on your project, but in the end you also meet partners for feedback, but also to be potential partners on your project. So this is a combination of things. And there are the mere co-production markets that are quite diverse, and you should try to identify the right one for your project. You can also go to several ones, but it's usually advisable to pick carefully when and where you want to go with your project. So there are, first of all, just to outline a little bit the differences that there are regional markets that are presenting projects from a specific region, or projects that are looking for partners from this specific region. So those are in Europe, just a few that I'll throw at you. There are more, but so there's Cinelink in Sarajevo, then there's Connecting Cottbus, there's Baltic Event, and in Tallinn, and there's Crossroads in Thessaloniki. So those are more markets that are dealing with East European, Southeast European projects. There are ones that are country specific, for example, Meetings on the Bridge, where Beste works. Also, that is presenting projects from Turkey or surrounding countries, and brings together people who are interested in that. There are other country-specific ones, for example, Paris Co-Production Village. If you're looking for French partners, then that may be a good place to go, because you're going to Paris and it's very convenient for the people there because they can just hop over from their office to meet you. Or you have project presentations that are usually conducted for international industry guests at several festivals. So, for example, Polish Days in Wrocław does that, or in Cluj they do that also with a presentation of Romanian projects. There are ones that are kind of, there's IFP in New York if you're into US partners, or if you have a US project looking for financiers, or there's strategic partners, and they also have a transatlantic training program that they work on. There's genre-driven ones, like Frontiers, for example, working on genre projects. There's not so many of those markets yet, but I'm sure there will be more. Then there's, of course, animation markets, specific animation markets. And then, in addition to the regional ones, there's also international ones, which is usually the biggest co-production markets that there are, which is the Cinemart in Rotterdam, which is basically the first. It's always called the mother of all co-production markets, because they were, I think, one of the first to introduce these one-on-one meetings between the projects, and they've done that for some 30 years now. There's the Berlinale co-production market. I think those two are probably the biggest international co-production markets. In Berlin we have some 500 to 600 participants, of which there are some about 100 are the people who are presenting the projects. We have 35 projects usually, plus we have so many Asian participants, we might not select your project, which is not a matter of quality, but it's just simply because maybe we cannot help you so much with this project there. We might just rather give you a few recommendations of people that you can contact, rather than selecting the project. And then there's for example Les Arts, which focuses on Europe, and also Rome is another international one. Sofia is another one that focuses more on Europe, and there's the London Film Finance Market, which is a bit more financing driven. So it's kind of more for commercial projects, meant to be at least. The regional markets, did I mention them? Yeah, I mentioned the East European ones, but there's also ones in Scandinavia, like the Nordic Film Market in Haugesund, or there's also ones in other parts of the world, of course. Like in Busan, the one is quite known for Asia, or the Hong Kong Asia Film Financing Forum. Now the Chinese festivals are each building up co-production markets as well now, but they are new, so it's a bit hard to say. Then there's a lot in Mexico going on, and in some other Latin American countries as well. But Europe is basically very big for co-production, so it's probably the place with the most co-production markets as well. So first of all, when you want to apply with your project to a market, identify when does it take place, does it make sense for your project with the timeline that you have. For example, as I mentioned earlier briefly, if you want to shoot next March, then don't apply now for the Berlinale co-production market, because just doesn't make sense. If you're definitely shooting in March, then it doesn't make sense. If you're still up to consider it and maybe to push the shooting start, then that can work. But we've made that experience with a project this year that was shooting very early, and they didn't need a lot of money, so we thought, okay, they don't need to approach the co-producers don't need to approach a regional fund still. So maybe we can consider this because they only need a very small portion of the money, and maybe the German partner or whatever partner can find a pre-sales from their country, so we don't need to allow too much time. But they were shooting in May, and the market was in February, and a lot of the producers realized that, and they said, okay, no, this is not for me, because I cannot bring them any money in that short time. So that is something that will not help you find all sorts of partners for your project. If you want to be as open as possible, allow also enough time as you can for this to find partners. So, but also you need, of course, time to apply, and you need to make a good presentation for the co-production market. You need to consider, like, is there a specific status of the project? Are there specific requirements of the market, of this particular market that I want to apply for? Or is there another market that might be more worthwhile? Is there a specific focus, like, for example, the genre, or are there specific budgets that this market works with usually? Or is there a specific requirement in terms of financing that needs to be in place? There are different kinds of rules. Of course, like what you most of all want to know is who are the participants of that market. I've once been approached by a friend, filmmaker, like 10 years ago, and he said, yeah, I've been invited to this co-production thing in this festival it was somewhere, a small festival, a small festival somewhere in Switzerland, and I'm like, oh, I've never heard that they're doing something there. And then and he's like, what does it bring me? What can I expect there? And I said, well, have you asked them who's coming? And he said, no. So he actually got a list of the people afterwards. So he participated. It was a small thing, so it wasn't like a big exposure for the project. But then he was very excited about it. And afterwards, he sent me a list of the people who participated, and there was one producer among them. So all the other people were just interested in projects. And of course that didn't really bring him a co-producer. So do that research, like who's there that can be really viable for my project. Am I looking for German partners? Maybe a German market would be a good thing to apply for, because probably a lot of Germans are going there. Am I looking for Asian partners? Maybe I should try to see if there's a market there that will accept a European project that is looking for Asian partners. Maybe it's a good way. And then also consider, like, as I said, the budgets. For example, in Cottbus, we are dealing usually more with art house projects with smaller budgets. So if you come with a 10 million euro budget project, we're not really sure we have the right partners for you, because we are working with art house producers who usually produce for smaller amounts of money. So the 10 million euro project might be better off in another market than in this small market with producers who deal with small budget projects usually. That's all your research that you should do, and have a look at the regulations. But talking about regulations very briefly, there are often regulations, and I hate myself saying that because I'm constantly inviting people to break the rules, but regulations that a market sets, try to consider them. But if you are not sure, or if you say, well, my project fulfills all the regulations except one, do speak to them, do ask them, do communicate, and do check if maybe there is still a chance to apply, or if there are exceptions or so. That is always important. Don't think the rules are set in stone. They are usually not. Also about deadlines. People say, oh, I missed the deadline for 2 days, now I cannot apply. Well, it's not usually like that. So do communicate, but do communicate on time, and don't come in January when the market is in February and the deadline was in October. Don't come in January and say, hey, I have this new idea, and the projects have already been announced that are going to present in their market. Of course that doesn't make sense. So be a bit realistic, but be nice, and if you talk to people, that can always help sometimes for them to expect, okay, you will send your project maybe a week later because you still need time to translate the treatment. No problem, because we can't read everything in the first week anyway. So don't make it more difficult for yourself than it has to be. Okay, allow some time to prepare the material. I think Marjorie is giving you feedback on material too. Please use page numbers. Just one thing. No, nowadays we don't really print the things anymore. But if you are asked to send material in, and this goes for everything, like for co-production markets as well as for other events, send in the material in the way that you are asked to send in the material. If you are, sometimes people are very thoughtful, and in some cases it's very nice, but in some cases it isn't. If you are required to send in a project brochure, or if you have to fill in a form with all the information, don't send me 5 different documents in addition to give me the synopsis, the logline, the link, whereas everything should be in the form, because I need to open them, every one of them separately, and I will hate you from the beginning. So just try to stick to the way that they want the project presented, and not the way that the last one wanted the project to be presented, and you say, oh, I already have that, I can just send it the way it was for that one. Try to be nice also in that communication. So then, once you are selected, check again, like who's participating, who's coming there, what to expect of them. Maybe contact some of the people beforehand that you're going to meet at that market. Check the conventions of the market, because in Berlin we don't really fancy that, because we are setting up the meetings, and it always gets very confusing when then people contact each other on the side and they say, oh, let's make a meeting at that time, and we say, yeah, but that's the time when we schedule the meetings for you. So that check it out, like what is advisable there, and what makes sense, and when it gets too much, maybe also for yourself, because if you already have 25 meetings organized by the market, maybe you can't handle that many more, even yourself. You should also try to identify questions that your meeting partners could have for you. If you have a market, if you participate in a market that has one-on-one meetings, try to anticipate, like what would they think could be a problem about my film, about my project, and how can I meet that concern. And try to have some material to show when you go to a market. Really do your homework beforehand. Not only be able to talk nicely about your project, but ideally, if you can, try to have something that you could show. It's getting more and more that people have teasers ready beforehand and so on. I've already seen that here also with the projects. And this is getting more, and I think it's a good thing, because you do want to see, like, what do you want to do, what is it going to look like. But be really careful and don't show anything that you're not entirely convinced of, or that might not really represent the style, because, I mean, you all know this. Whatever you see, it burns into your brain, and you will see that always when you think of that project. So if it's really bad storyboards that you have, don't do it. So, but if it's something that you find really, representative of what you want to do, then yes, it's very helpful to have that kind of thing to show. When you are in an individual meeting, also one thing that I can say from I'm almost through. I'm almost at the end, by the way. We're finishing. So just when you meet someone, it often happens to me that I'm meeting a project at a market, but I'm meeting it because I just want to get to know the people, or I'm interested in the producer and so on. But what happens is, the minute I sit down, somebody starts pitching a project to me that I've just read, and I don't want to hear the pitch because it's too detailed, too long, and I don't even, I'm like, hey, I wanted to speak to you about the project, and I didn't want to be talked. This is what I'm doing at the moment, the whole time. So But don't pitch if your opposite doesn't want it. That's it. I mean, speak with them, check with them, maybe even ask them, like, what would they like to hear? Would they like you to pitch the project? And if they say no, then don't start pitching, because that's happened to me as well. Because people didn't expect that. Yeah, and I think that's about it if you want to get to a co-production market. Of course, then you participate in the market, then you do your thing, you pitch, or you have the one-on-one meetings, or both. Stick to the regulations and conventions of the market when you do the pitching. And afterwards, follow up. That's the most important thing. Once you've done the market and you've met the people, then also try to remember who all of these people were that you met there, which is sometimes actually hard when you've had many meetings. Try to remember who they were, what they were about, and who do you want to follow up with, in which way, and who might you want to work with in the future. And then later on you will get some interest, and you will also get some no's from some people who then read your script and they say, doesn't work for me. Take it well, don't be too disappointed, because there are always several reasons. I've kind of tried to outline this or mention this a little bit earlier. Sometimes a project just doesn't fit in that specific moment for someone. Or maybe they don't see in there what you see in there. You can still believe in your project, and you can still go on and find the next person that will believe in the project with you afterwards. Even if it's a no from your first choice partner, there can still, maybe there's an even better one waiting. That's basically, I try to cut it short now in the end, because it took so much time. I'm sorry to keep you so long. Didn't manage to keep it any shorter. Are there any questions or comments from your side that you would like to add or ask? No.
Would you have an example, like an anecdote, a case that you remember through your experience during those Berlinale co-productions, like something that you have in mind, like an example? Let's say a project that you wouldn't expect it would make it, and it did.
And it did.
And it did make it. Like it has been done, it was successful, although it seemed it wouldn't be. Or the opposite.
Unfortunately, it's often what you realize is more the opposite, because the projects that we select are usually projects that we really hope and believe that they will be made. So, but sometimes you have cases where you think this project is just fantastic, it's great, and everybody loves it, and then it doesn't happen. There are sometimes very simple reasons, like, for example, I don't know, we had a Belgian project at some point, and it was great, it was really fantastic, everybody loved the project, everybody wanted to meet the project, but they didn't have their local funding at that time, not their support from the local fund, and then the fund decided not to support any projects that were foreign language or something like that. It was, I don't know if it was English language or something, and I don't recall precisely. But then they couldn't get the money from their home territory, and that's the main reason often when a project falls through, is if you really don't manage to get the money from your own territory, then you won't be able to make it, and you'll disappoint the people that you've already found interest in from another country. So that's also another reason why it's good to have secured your own territory in a way before you go look for others, or while you do it, but already know that you will find the money from your own country that you need for it. Projects that were particularly successful, where we were surprised, I don't know, we're always hopeful. So in general, I mean, one project recently that was, I can't tell a specific story about it, but there was Embrace of the Serpent was one of the projects in the co-production markets, Tiro Guerra's film from Colombia, and it was made as a co-production and then it went. That's the one that was nominated for an Academy Award. Those are the ones that are, of course, the projects that you like to remember in a way. He came back with his new project this year too, so that's one that now everybody's really eager to partner on and to make very soon. We had one project actually that was a surprise in that sense. It was Mongol by Sergei Bodrov. This was in 2005, a long time ago. And when we read the project, we were like, oh, it's about Mongols, and they're like one of my colleagues, when they read it, they said, oh, so it's riding, chopping off heads. That was the pitch, and it was really like, okay, should we do that? Shouldn't we do that? But of course, it was a named director with good companies attached, but from what we read about the project, it wasn't so convincing in that sense, maybe. But then we selected it, and it was also an Academy Award nominee in the end, at least. I must say I haven't seen the film, so I can't say how it turned out. But yes, things like that happen. Or, of course, also there's some films that you don't select and then they get really successful. That also happens, and it's not bad, because it really has reasons why you select a certain project or not for a market. And it's not only the question if you believe in the project, but it is also the question, can you help that project in the market, in your specific market, to find the right partners. So sometimes it just doesn't, you just think you're not the right market to help a project. Yeah. That's it.
Yeah. I just wanted to underline something you said, which, considering most people here are writers, the point that you take your script or your treatment to the point of thinking that it's a co-production or going to a market, you already have to have it in such developed stage, and it is pretty much years sometimes of work. And after this moment, and if you consider that it's a co-production, it takes so much time afterwards, as you just heard. So just kind of to not lose hope, like all the years that you have to put into the film, into the script, so that it gets to the point that you think people who read it are going to be really interested. And then you can start applying for stuff like co-production, So just to kind of, on the one side, a bit of reality check, on the other side, patience, hoping for patience, because many people have said that you think your films are co-productions, so just to think about the timeline again, which was something important Martina said, to consider. Because co-production can be very nice.
Really nice, yeah. I agree. Okay, talking about timeline. Thank you very much for all the work.